Welcome everyone to this session, which is on integrating GitHub with Microsoft Teams with the help of GitHub Actions and Power Automate Flow. Uh, Right. First of all, before starting the session, I would like to thank all the sponsors of this event. For without them, this event wouldn't have been possible. And also thank you to the organizing team and the speakers, for taking their time away during the weekend and organizing this event. So thank you very much, guys. Right. Uh, let's start with a boring slide, which is the introduction about myself. So this is me. My name is Anoop Tatti. I am a SharePoint developer at a company called as Content Plus Cloud, based in London. So I write some blogs about SharePoint and Power Automate uh, related posts. I write them on a platform called as Medium, and that's my link. That's the link to my blog post, anoop.medium.com. I'm on Twitter as well under the username AnoopTells, and my GitHub username is AnoopT. That's where I put all the repositories, and I'll be sharing some of the repositories which will be used in the call in the chat window towards the end. Right. So the agenda for today is we'll start by taking a look at what GitHub Actions are, and then we'll do a demo of how these GitHub Actions can be used in order to integrate with Microsoft 365. And then we'll have a look at the flow that was used in the demo, and then we'll conclude the presentation after that. So, right, let's start with GitHub Actions. Now, in order to understand GitHub Actions, we need to firstly understand what a GitHub workflow is. So a GitHub workflow, just like any other workflow, is nothing but a set of tasks which get executed when an event happens in a GitHub repository. Say, for example, we have a repository hosted in GitHub, and someone pushes a file onto the repository, and then we can decide that to create a workflow for that purpose. I can create a workflow which will trigger when someone pushes a file onto a repository, and what that workflow will do is it'll build the code and then maybe send an email saying the build was successful, or whatever the outcome of the build was. So that's an example of a workflow. So basically, a set of tasks that run when something happens in a GitHub repository. Right. Now let's quickly look into the elements present in a workflow. So firstly, in a workflow, we need an event or a trigger so that the workflow should start. So this trigger can be anything in GitHub. It can be a push event, a pull request, or when an issue is opened, or it can run on a schedule, and many others. So you name an event in GitHub. If you think of any event in GitHub, GitHub have made sure that there is a trigger present for that. So we can use any of these triggers in order to start our workflow. It can be either one trigger or multiple triggers. It's all up to us. We will see how to use those in the next slides. So once we have our trigger defined, we then decide on the next part, which is the host machine. It's right over there. So that's because the workflow it needs to run somewhere. In the previous example, I told you that when someone pushes a file onto a repository, the code needs to be built. So that build task, right, it needs to run somewhere, and that's where the host machine comes in. So we can decide what type of host machine we want. It can be a Windows machine, a Linux machine, or a Mac machine. While writing the workflow, we get an option or to decide what host machine we want. The reason for different host machine is some of the tasks might work only on Windows. Some of the tasks might work on Linux, but some of the tasks, for some of the tasks, it doesn't matter. They just work on all the machines. Uh, so that's why we need to decide what host machine we want. And once we have those, we have the event or the trigger when the workflow should start, and then we have decided on what host machine it should run. We then define a set of tasks in the workflow. So and tasks are nothing but these. So a task can be very simple. It can just be a line of code. Say something like, once the workflow has started, we might print a line to say this workflow has started, something like that, or any welcome message, or whatever it is. That can be a simple task. And then the task can be more complicated as well. Instead of just writing a line of code, we can have a few lines of code, to do certain, to achieve something. So we can do that as well. So that will be a complex task. And another kind of task is, instead of writing all these lines of code ourselves, we call something called as a GitHub action. That action is nothing but it'll have all the lines of code. So someone would have done all the hard work of writing several lines of code, and all we do is just call that action, and then that will do the task for us. So that is nothing but that task is nothing but your calling an action. So in the example that we will see in today's demo, what we will do is we will call an action, and we will see how that action was created. So yeah, just to recap, a GitHub workflow, just like any other workflow, has a trigger and then runs on a particular host machine and runs a certain set of tasks. These tasks can be very simple, like having a line of code, can be complex, multiple lines of code, or can be something as simple as calling an action, which does all the job for us. Right. Moving on to the next slide. Now, how do we create these workflows? Well, GitHub have made this process very straightforward. So all we have to do is go to GitHub, open our repository, and then click on the Actions tab. And then once we click on that, we see this button called as Setup a Workflow. Click on that, and then that opens something called as a YAML file. So if you are familiar with Azure DevOps, even in order to create a pipeline, we use YAML files. So that it's a similar file that we use here in GitHub Workflow as well. So in that YAML file, we define the elements of the workflow. So firstly, we give it a nice name. In this case, it's just printing hello world. And then here we define a trigger. So in this case, we are saying on push. This means whenever a file is pushed onto this repository, we want the workflow to trigger. And then we say what the host machine is. In this case, I'm saying Windows latest. And then we define the set of tasks. So in this case, it's just one task, which is printing hello world, because that's what the first workflow should do. It should print hello world, right? So that's just a simple task. And then so what happens is when someone pushes a file onto this repository, the workflow will trigger. And then as you can see on the right side over here, it just prints hello world. So that's a simple workflow, and it's quite straightforward to set it up. Right, now let's move on to the next slide. Right, now you might be wondering, this event is about Microsoft 365, and why am I going on talking about GitHub and GitHub workflows? Well, the scenario I'm trying to establish here is, let's say we have a team in which all the code that we write is on GitHub, but all the collaboration is done on Microsoft 365, i.e. we use Teams and Outlook, etc. for collaboration. So in that kind of scenario, we can think of integrating GitHub along with Microsoft 365, and that's where this presentation comes in. Over here, I've established three scenarios. Now, these are just example scenarios, but after this session, you can think of any other scenarios and let me know about those, and I will be very excited to hear about those scenarios. So one of the scenario might be, say, whenever there's a pull request on the repository, we might want to create a workflow. What that workflow will do is it will go ahead and create an event in the calendar of the owner of the GitHub repository to review the pull request. So that event might be created, say, 2 hours after the pull request was submitted, or maybe on the next day. So it will give them a reminder saying, hey, someone has created a pull request, you need to go ahead and review it. So instead of sending an email, we just create an event in the Outlook calendar. That's one example. The second scenario might be, say, whenever there's a new release of the code or of the repository, um, uh, then we trigger a workflow, and then what that workflow will do is maybe send a notification in Teams, maybe in a channel or somewhere else, to say that a release has been created. So the team will come to know that a release has been created, and then they can go ahead and do the next tasks. And the third scenario, which is the one that we will be looking at in today's demo, is what we'll do is the scenario. What it'll do is there's a workflow which will run, say, once every week, and then what that does is it'll look at all the high priority issues that are present on the repository, and then it takes those issues, only the ones that are open and are labeled as high priority. It takes those issues and then posts, and then sends those issues to a flow, and then the flow goes ahead and uh, posts those issues onto a Teams channel. That is what we'll be looking at today. So these are some of the scenarios. Now, there might be other scenarios as well in which the flow can be used for different purposes in the upcoming sessions, by Reza and Deepak. So of course we all know that Reza has a lot of videos on flow, so there might be some inspiration on the flows from those videos. And the last session from Deepak talks about integrating with Planner, so a scenario can be established there as well. So yeah. So I just wanted to establish all the different scenarios that I have thought of, and now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look into the third scenario, which is the posting onto a Teams. So what we'll do in the demo is I'll show you a GitHub repository to begin with, and then then I'll show you the workflow, which gets triggered on a schedule, and then what that workflow does is it gets all the issues that have been labeled as, in this case, bug, and then post those issues to a flow, and then we look at the flow. What the flow does is it gets all those issues, parses them, and then posts an adaptive card to a Teams channel, and in the end, the flow also sends a notification to a user. Right. Let's jump into the demo now. So what I'll do is, from my presentation, I'll just switch on to my browser. So here's the repository that we'll be looking at, and I have given it the name as Top Secret Project. Well, it's just a name. There's nothing secret in it. There are no files in this repository apart from a README file. So what this project so let's imagine that several people are working on this project and some issues have been created. So if I just go into the issues tab, so here we can see that there are a few issues. So 3 of them have been labeled as bug and they are open, and there's one called as help wanted, which is also open, but it has been labeled with help wanted. Now, what needs to happen is the team needs to get a notification, say beginning of every week, uh, onto the teams to just to know what issues are labeled as bug and are open. So for that, what we'll do is we'll achieve that using a workflow. So if I just go on to the code again, and then I've gone ahead and created a workflow. That was nothing but, I went into the actions tab and then just clicked on set up a workflow, and then I have created a workflow, which is nothing but a YAML file. So over here, so if I just zoom in a bit, right. What I've done is I've given it a nice name, and then the trigger, if you see, it says it should run on a schedule. So earlier in the earlier example, we saw that the workflow should run when something is pushed onto the repository. In this case, the trigger is on a schedule. So we've defined the schedule as 9 a.m. every Monday, and this is a cron expression. So we can make changes to it to define the schedule accordingly. And then what this workflow does is it should run on a Linux OS machine, which is Ubuntu, uses the latest version of Ubuntu. And then all this workflow does is it calls a GitHub action. Now we will look into what the action does. So basically, it calls the action, and then that action, it expects a few parameters. We will come to know about all these parameters in the next few minutes in the demo. So we are saying that all the issues with the label bug and that are open needs to be passed on to this action, and then we also pass the URL of a flow. Now, all this will make sense in a minute, but essentially what we are doing here in the workflow is we're calling an action and then passing it a few parameters to say, get those issues which have the label as bug and have the state as open. We aren't passing the issues themselves. We are just saying, okay, okay, Mr. Action, I'm passing you these parameters. You do the next steps of getting the issues which are labeled as bug and are open. Right. And then this is what the workflow does. So let's go ahead and run this workflow. Now, this workflow runs on Monday at 9 a.m. Now, you can't wait till Monday 9 a.m. For this workflow to run. So what I've done is I had run this workflow some time back. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just rerun the workflow instead of waiting until Monday. So I've gone into the workflow and then just to rerun all the jobs. And then what this does is it gives us a view of what all things happen in the workflow. So if I just open the job, so as you can see, it says it has started the job now. It's using Ubuntu latest. So it sets up the job. It calls the action, and then it finishes the job. So if I just expand the action, yeah, you can see that the action outputs some messages. Now we will see how all these messages have been written in a minute, but essentially that action gets all the issues, test issue 3, 2, and 1, and then it sends them to the flow, which is nothing but an HTTP triggered flow. So now if I go into my dev tenant, where the flow is, or rather where the team is, you can see that at about 15:18 today, this message was posted in a Teams channel. So from what just now happened was when the workflow triggered, it called a GitHub action. That GitHub action essentially got all the issues from the repository which were labeled as bug and were open, and then sent them to a flow, and that flow went ahead and posted it onto this Teams channel. So if we just look at this message in brief, it says what it has a nice title for each of the issues. It says to whom the issue has been assigned, gives some details about the issue, and then if needed, we can click on more details. That takes us to the GitHub repository itself, and then there's a button at the bottom which is view in GitHub. Clicking on that, so if I just copy that link, go back to my browser and just open that in a new tab, you can see that it shows all the issues labeled as bug and that are open. Yeah, so so that was the demo. Now we'll look at two aspects that we saw in the demo. One is the GitHub action, which did all the hard work of getting the issues and sending them to the flow. And then the second bit we will look at is the flow itself, which got all those issues, parsed them, and then sent to the Teams channel. Right. So if I just go back to my repository again, so as you can see, when the workflow ran, it called. So if I just zoom in a little, sorry. Yeah, when the workflow ran, it called this GitHub action called as get issues and then HTTP post. So this is the GitHub action which I have created. Now let's look at the details of that particular action. Now that particular action is nothing but another GitHub repository. So if I just switch tabs and go to this one, you can see that under my under my account, I have created a repository called get issues HTTP post, and this is the GitHub action that was called. Now what I'll do is I'll just open this repository in my in Visual Studio Code, and then we'll take a look at it. All right. So I've opened it over here. It's the same set of files. Now, if you look at the structure, this is nothing but a simple Node.js project, which was created using TypeScript. So it has, the source folder and node modules and package.json, etc. So it's nothing but a Node.js project created using TypeScript. Now, if we just create this project, GitHub won't know that this is a GitHub action. GitHub will just think, hey, this is just a normal Node.js project created with TypeScript. Can you please, tell us why this is an action? So that's why what we have to do is we have to create this file called as action.yaml. Now this is the file which, if present in a repository, tells GitHub that this project is a GitHub action. So this file, I'll post a link on how to, like, what are the details of this file and how it is defined, etc. But it's quite straightforward. It's a YAML file with some, with some details. So in this case, we say what's the name of the action, give it a description, provide the author name, and then provide what are all the different inputs, etc. So that's it. Once we have this file, GitHub will know that this is an action, meaning whenever someone references this project in their workflow, then GitHub knows that it has to call this particular action and run the code in this action to do the next steps. So that's why we have this action file, action.yaml. And then this particular action or this particular project has one main file or one important file, which is nothing but the main.ts. And we will go through the details of this file to understand what this action does. So like I said in the beginning, this is nothing but a TypeScript project, and hence the .TypeScript file. So what we are doing here is, to begin with, we are just importing some of the packages provided by GitHub. So again, there's no need for us to write a lot of code. GitHub themselves have created a lot of packages under the actions repository, which we can just use and then basically they have made our lives easier in order to create the actions. So one of the important packages that you see in almost all GitHub actions is this actions slash core, and the other one is actions slash GitHub. Now these two packages have almost all the code that is needed in order to create an action. Those are the two things we import, and then we also import the fetch from the node fetch package. This is needed in order to call the flow, or nothing but call the HTTP endpoint. Yeah. So what we do initially is each action might expect some input. So in this case, we saw that we were passing the filter label and the filter state to this action. So that's what is defined over here. So if you see, we've got filter label and filter state. So we get those values using the using the core module, which is coming from actions. So that can be, the filter label can be bug or question or a custom label that we have created in GitHub repository, or anything we need. And then we say the filter state, which is either open or closed, or anything else. So, and then the third input that we get is the HTTP endpoint. This is nothing but the URL of the flow, or maybe even if we have a logic app instead of a flow, this can be the the HTTP trigger URL of the flow or the logic app. So we get all these inputs, and then the next thing we do is there's something called as OctoKit client. Now this one, which we are seeing over here, we need to create this client in order to perform some operations with our GitHub repository. So in this case, the operation is to get the issues of the GitHub repository. So that's why we use this OctoKit client. Again, we could have written all the code to get the issues ourselves, but GitHub have provided this library which we can use in order to get the issues. So I'll just quickly go to my browser window and then show you what this OctoKit client is. So if I just come here, and then it's nothing but a JavaScript module which has been provided by GitHub in order to work with the repositories. So as you can see, there's some details on how to use this. And then if I just scroll down on the left side over here, there are all the different different modules that we can interact with. So one of them is the issues. So that's what we will be using later on in the action. So there are a lot of there are a lot of functions related to issues that we can use. So one is, say, for example, if you want to create an issue, then we can use this particular endpoint, and then here they give an example of what code needs to be written. So it says issues.create, and then we pass on the owner, the repository, and the title of the issue, and then we can also pass all these other details. So this OctoKit, it's quite detailed. We can use various functions from this in our action. So now if I just go back to the code of the action again, so like I said, we've got the OctoKit client, and then the main thing that we do is, if I just scroll down a bit, if you see over here, what we are doing is basically this line, just building an options object in which we are saying, use the OctoKit client to get the issues from the current repository, which have the state as whatever is passed in the filter state. In this case, it is open, and then whatever label they are assigned with. In this case, it is bug. So we define that options object, and then all we do is we call the OctoKit.pageInit method, and then pass the options object. and then that's it. That method goes ahead and gives us all the issues. So that's how easy it is to get all the issues of a certain label or of a certain state present in a repository. So once we have all those issues, what we do is we go ahead and create a new object which needs to be sent to the flow. So we loop through all the issues. We get the title, the body, the URL of the issue, to whom it has uh, uh, been assigned, and get their avatar URL so that we can display their photo. So we get all these details, put them in a nice object, and then all we do at the bottom over here is, uh, you know, we build another object which has the URL of the issues, the one that I opened some time back, and then it has got all the issues, and then we give it a nice subject and the notification text. So we build this object, and then if I scroll down further, uh, all we do over here is we use the fetch function and then call the HTTP endpoint. In this case, it is the the HTTP trigger URL of the flow. Like I said, it can be a logic app HTTP trigger as well. And then all we do is we pass the object that we just built onto the flow. And that's it. And that's what all the action does. And you are seeing over here that there are some messages like calling the HTTP endpoint and then data sent to HTTP endpoint. These are all helpful messages that we can write in the action. Uh, and then these messages, they will be shown when the workflow runs. So if I just go back to the point where the workflow ran, you can see the messages like calling HTTP endpoint and data sent to endpoint, etc. Right. So that was the action part. So we have written all the code which will get all the issues and then send them to a flow. Now in this over here, I've just written code to get all the issues, but you can write different code as well and then create an action for that. So instead of getting all the issues, it might be something like, I don't know, getting the details of a release, or you can think of various possibilities based on this the Octet client, which gives us all the details. Get an issue event, get label, etc. So there are lots of functions which can be utilized from this Octet client in our action. Right. So that was the action. So now, so what I did was I created this action, and then I built this action, and then all the all the action files and the packages were compiled into JavaScript and then put in the lib folder, and that was uploaded onto the GitHub repository. So if I just go back over here, you can see that we have the action. Sorry, we have the same folder structure over here, and then the final file, which is the this this /index.js was uploaded over here. Right. Now that that is done, let's see how the flow looks. So if I just go back to the workflow again, so in the workflow, first thing we did was we called the action, which generated all the issues, and it sent all those issues to a flow. So if I just go back to my dev tenant and then open the flow, so it is this flow. So if I edit this now, this is a very straightforward flow. So all we are doing here is when an HTTP request is received, we parse the JSON that comes from the GitHub Actions. So we have defined the schema over here. And then what we do is for each of the issue that is present in the parsed JSON, we build a nice HTML message. Now, over here, I'm just using some HTML with some hard-coded styles. That's because my UI development is very poor. So apologies for that. But instead of doing this, you can think of creating an adaptive card with some template, and then put all the issues in an adaptive card, and then generate that big adaptive card message, and then take that and then post it to the teams. But in this case, like I said, I'm building all this HTML, and then adding some more HTML in the end, and then all I do is just get the team where we want these issues to be posted and the channel in that team, and then just post the message. So that goes ahead, and when it runs, it just posts a message in Teams. So like I said, this is just a simple flow, but our next speaker, Reza Durrani, if you watch his YouTube channel, you'll get more exciting flows. Right, and then one more action. What we do in the end is we just send a mobile notification to say, these are the issues basically, and then it'll have a nice text and the link to the URL on the GitHub site, which will show all the issues. Right. So that was the demo. So just to recap, what we saw was, we started with the GitHub repository. And then we saw the workflow that was created in the GitHub repository, which runs on a schedule, and all that workflow does is calls a GitHub action, and that action, what it does is it gets all the issues that are tagged with a certain label and are open. So we saw how we saw the code on in which we get all the issues. And then create an object, JSON object, and then pass that to a flow, and then the flow gets that JSON object, parses that object, and then builds an HTML string and posts it onto a Teams channel. Which we saw that there were 3 issues, and then there were the photos of the users as well, and all the other details. And then finally, the flow also sends a notification using the notifications action. Right. Now, next slide. Yeah. So just a few more points on the GitHub Actions. Like I said, in this action we saw that we were able to get issues, but the possibilities are endless because this is a TypeScript code. You can use that AutoKit client in order to do other operations. And creating these GitHub Actions is quite easy. The reason I say that is if I just go back to the browser again, what the GitHub team have done is they have something, this actions account. Under that, there is a repository called as TypeScript action. Over here, they have given us the basic structure of how the action should look. So when I created the action, I just forked this repository and then started making changes to it. I did not create it from scratch. I used this particular repository. In this case, they explain what needs to be done. So I have skipped the tests part. I shouldn't have done that, but you can. It's up to you whether you want to keep the test related files or not. But then here they clearly explain what code needs to be changed, how it has to be written, and how it has to be published, etc. So basically I followed all these instructions and created the action. So that's why it's very straightforward. So if you know TypeScript or JavaScript, you can just go ahead and create an action. It's that straightforward. And we can create more and more actions that do different things. So one of the other actions that I've created is an action that uses Microsoft Graph. So let's say there might be like the scenario which I explained earlier. Whenever there's a pull request on our repository, we might want to create an event in someone's calendar. So for that, we can use this particular action that I've created. If I just show you the README, all it does is it uses the MSAL or Microsoft Authentication Library for Node and calls graph, and then goes ahead and creates an event in the specified person's calendar. So uh, in the previous session from US, we saw that there were some endpoints related to Teams. So some of those endpoints can be used in the action. Of course, we have to be wary of the delegated and application permissions. In this case, in this particular action, we are using application permissions because not all the graph endpoints support application permissions, only some of them. The create event endpoint supports application permission. That's why we were able to use it. Whereas in order to send a message to a Teams channel, it uses only delegated permissions. So that's why the flow came into the picture. So instead of directly calling graph from the GitHub action, we called a flow which went ahead and then posted it onto the Teams. So yeah, what I'm trying to say here is the possibilities are endless. So we can think of scenario and create an action for that, and then help other people use that action in their GitHub workflows. Right. Right, and finally, these are all the various resources that will help us in creating a GitHub action. So I'll be posting all these resources in the chat window. What I have also done is all the details that I've explained in this particular call, I have written a blog post around that, detailing the same. So I'll post a link to this as well in the chat. So in this, I explain, what are GitHub Actions, what the Power Automate does, and what the workflow does, and how we can change the workflow, and also some bits on the other possibilities in the workflow, and then a few details on the code of the action itself. So you can refer this blog post as well in order to create your own action. And like I said, these are all the different resources. So I've included documentation from the GitHub team itself on, which explains what GitHub Actions are and how to create them. There are a few tips presented by the GitHub team as well. And there's a blog post and documentation on the OctoKit REST client, and the TypeScript action, which can be used as a base in order to create our own actions. All right, and with that, I would like to thank you all for attending this session. Yeah, looks like we have some extra time for any question and answers. Yeah, thank you once again, and that's it from my side, Ras.
Thank you, Anoop. Excellent. So there is questions.
Right.
If you can see, the first question is from Aka, who's asking, could there be a reverse scenario whereby an issue can be created via Teams and published to GitHub?
Right. Right. So for that, I think one of the scenarios that was mentioned in the previous session from US was on creating a webhook, or it's like it's not. I forget the name now, but it's there is a way wherein. Yeah, I think it's like incoming webhook and outgoing webhook. So you can create an outgoing webhook on Teams, which will trigger when something happens in Teams, and then you decide what needs to happen when that event triggers. So that can be done. And also with respect to the subscriptions that was mentioned in the previous calls. So I'm not sure, but maybe there is a subscription which says whenever there's an event that happens in Teams, like an issue is created, you go ahead and run some set of code, and that code might include uh, you know creating an issue in GitHub, something like that. Yeah, or maybe say we can have an HTTP triggered flow which runs when an event happens in Teams, and then in that flow we call the the OctoKit REST API, which will go ahead and create an issue. So something around those lines. But yeah, it needs to be explored, but can be done is the answer. Yeah, hope that is helpful.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Aka, did that answer your question? Yep. You answered Aka's question. He's satisfied. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions?
See that someone has raised their hand. Aziz.
Okay. Aziz has raised his hand. Shall we unmute Aziz? Let's make him a presenter. Hello there, Aziz. You can unmute, please. Hi there, Aziz. You can now ask your question if you unmute yourself. Okay, while we wait for Aziz to unmute himself, are there any other questions? Does anybody have any other questions?
Okay. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and post all the links onto the chat until that happens.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you for that, Anoop.